What I know from my exposure of science of mind and having been a teacher now for 34 years and the application of it, we overcomplicate the entire process because it shouldn't be as difficult to create a life worth living as sometimes we make it. And what I discovered is that, and the title of my talk is Coming Home, and the subtitle, which I forgot to give Karen, is A Return to Wholeness. And what I've discovered through the years that I've been exploring this teaching as well as teaching it, what I know is this: at the end of the day, I'll give you a quote by Ernest Holmes, and I'm going to expand on it. Holmes wrote, "Nothing can bring peace but the revelation of the individual to himself and a recognition of his direct relationship to the universe." Let me read that one more time. Nothing can bring peace but the revelation of the individual to himself and a recognition of his direct relationship to the universe. That's another way of saying we came from wholeness. We came from the all that is, and we land in these earth suits, and all of a sudden we get spiritual amnesia and we forget from whence we've come. And in the journey, we begin to look to the world for our satisfaction, for our value, to create a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. And you'll never find it in the world. And what happens is we come from wholeness, and we land in these bodies, and we begin to get very forgetful about our oneness with God. And in that process, we make a journey into life seeking peace, because at the end of the day, that's all we truly want, is a deep sense of inner peace. We think sometimes it'll come in the acquisition of things or titles or positions or a physical condition. But behind all of those desires is one desire: to feel at peace. We think that when we acquire you name the accoutrement, whatever it may be, once we get it, we're going to feel at peace. But then we discover that we're on what I call the hedonic treadmill. And pretty soon that acquisition or that thing, whatever it is, material or otherwise, pretty soon we lay it aside and we continue to quest for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Always going further and further and further away from our awareness that God, the universe, is the source and supply of our good. And probably the best analogy of what I'm talking about comes in the form of the scriptures that, gosh, I love the teachings, especially in the New Testament. The story of the prodigal son. Are you familiar with that story? It's in Luke 15, verse 11, I believe. And what I know is this, that as the teacher Jesus pointed out in the prodigal son, the quest for the inner peace that we seek will never be found in the world. And he starts out the story. I'm going to tell you the story in a very brief form, and then we'll go back and analyze it from a metaphysical, spiritual perspective, okay? Jesus tells the story, there was a father who had two sons. And these two sons worked with him on a farm. And the younger son came to him one day and said, "Dad, I want my inheritance now. I'm feeling a yearning to go out and explore. I'm feeling this yearning to the far country's calling me. And I'd like you to give me, before you croak, before you die, I want my inheritance now so I can enjoy it." The father, unconditionally loving, "Sure, son, here it is." So the son packs up and leaves. And he goes to the far country. Now, which, of course, this story is full of idioms and metaphor. The far country, of course, takes him away from the father's home, right? From the farm, the source of his good. And so he ends up in the far country, and he takes his inheritance, and he uses it unwisely. He rents a condo. He spends it on riotous living, as it says in the scriptures. And pretty soon, all the money, the coin of the realm, was gone. And a great famine came upon the land. This is great metaphor, so you have to follow the metaphor in the idioms, because this is where the story is. And as soon as the great famine came upon the land, the son discovered that he was without anything to support himself. So he went and took a job working for a pig farmer, mucking the stalls for the pigs. Okay, and one day he's sitting in the pig farm, and he's mucking the stalls, and he's actually so destitute that he's eating the food of the pig. That's what it says in this story. And one day he's sitting there eating the husk of the corn, sharing the stall with the swine, and he has an awareness. He says, wait a minute. Even the servants back at Dad's farm have got it better than I do right now. I think I will rise and return to my father and apologize to him and beg him to just take me back as a servant. So he rises and makes the journey back. And as he's approaching his father, and this is such a beautiful metaphor. His father turns and sees him coming and runs towards his son. And before the son could get into the big thing about, Father, please forgive me and make me one of your servants, the father throws his arms around the son and kisses upon the neck. And he says to the servants, my son who was gone, who was dead, has returned. He's alive. Let's have a party. He says, bring the seamless robe. Bring a ring for his finger. Bring new sandals for his feet. And kill the fatted calf, because we're going to have a party to celebrate my son who was gone, who was dead, has come back to life. Now there's more to the story, but that's as far as we're going to take it at this point. Well, let's go back and look at the metaphor of it. It's very important. So we know that in the Scriptures, from a metaphysical perspective, every character in the Bible is reflective of some aspect of ourselves, okay? And so when we go back and we look at the metaphysical meaning of this amazing teaching parable, and that's how Jesus taught. He taught in parables because he understood the people of his generation. They did not have PhDs in English or Aramaic, I guess is what it'd be. But so he had to frame his teaching in the form of stories that they could relate to. And so the idioms in this story are part of his teaching technique. So as we talk about the reflection of this journey now, this journey of the prodigal son who left, separated himself from the father, and came back. Think of some aspects of your lives where the prodigal son resides. And there's other characters as we'll go along and talk about. So, obviously, the father in this story represents what? God, yeah. God, Jesus referred to God as the Father. Why do you think he did that? Because in his day and time, the common people, the father in the household was cherished. He was the caretaker and the provider and the unconditional lover in the family. So Jesus knew that one of the best ways to teach people the unconditional loving aspect of God was to refer to him as the Father. And so here's the father in this story who we can see metaphorically, idiomatically, is the representative of God. Now, what does the parable, the prodigal son represent to you? The prodigal son represents that part of us who has forgotten his heritage, his birthright, who has forgotten his oneness with the source from which he came. Prodigal son is that aspect of us that is the egoic self, if you want to call it that. Prodigal son is that part of us that believes there is better than here. And then when I get there, I'll have something that I don't have here. The metaphor of the prodigal son is it's a belief in separation from source, thinking that our good is out there anywhere. Can you find any place in your life where maybe the prodigal son has been stirring a little and kind of guiding you to the world of materiality? Oftentimes we seek that inner peace that we're talking about in the form of material things, whether it's a new house, a new car, a strong physical body, the things that pull us from our sense of our oneness with the divine. So The prodigal son, essentially, bottom line, looks to the external for his sense of authentic power. He looks to the world for it rather than within. The far country. What does the far country represent? Jesus was brilliant in this parable. The far country represents a belief in duality, a belief in separation from our source, the divine. The far country can be any aspect of our lives that make us forget our oneness with life. It can be based on a material aspect, and also your far country. What pulls you to the far country may be a physical condition, maybe it's a physical challenge, or a relationship issue, or someplace in your life where there's conflict, where you essentially go unconscious. You get that spiritual amnesia, and you forget I and the Father are one. And it's easy in our day and time. I can get taken to the far country just by watching the 6 o'clock news. It's the far country is anything that seduces us and causes us to feel a sense of separation from the one from which we came. Bottom line, the far country is anything that puts a divider between ourselves and God. It puts the world before God. It puts the world before our awareness of God's presence. So here's the moral of the story. The son, after he reaches the far country, that full state of separation, he goes through all of his loot, and a great famine comes upon the land. What does that mean? Now, notice the famine came after he spent all of his loot. What is a great famine? What's the metaphor of a great famine? It's a belief in lack, in limitation, which is the reflection of him going through all of his inheritance. A famine means that essentially he is experiencing the effect of going unconscious and thinking that the far country is his home. And so what does he do? He sitting there eating the food of the swine and mucking the swine stalls. Now, Jesus was brilliant. Can you imagine anything worse for a nice Jewish boy than to be working on a pig farm, mucking pig stalls, and eating the food of the swine? For a nice Jewish boy, that's not a conducive way to live. What Jesus was pointing out is that this son in this story had fallen so far into degradation that he went totally unconscious about his oneness with his source, God. And then he's sitting there one day in the midst of all of this, and this is where he had his redefining moment. Okay? It says, something came to him, and he had this awareness that, oh, wait a minute. Even the servants back at the farm have got it better than I do. I think I will rise and return to my father. Now, what does that mean? Metaphorically or idiomatically, what does to rise mean? It means to have a shift in consciousness, to ascend in consciousness from duality to singularity, to ascend from that sense of separation to wait a minute, the Father and I are one. I'm going to return. And so he makes this journey back. And as he's returning to his Father and to ask for forgiveness and just to be put on the staff as a servant, the Father turns and sees him coming. What's the metaphor there? What is the idiom of that? As we move towards a reunification, a oneness with God, God automatically, open arms, receives us. Notice that the father in the story, as the son approached, he didn't walk up to his son and say, hey, I could have told you this was going to happen. You should have invested your money in the money market certificates or the T-bills or something more wise and stay closer to home. But the unconditional nature of the Father was to give of itself unconditionally without holding anything back. And the Father coming towards him and embracing him and kissing him on the neck is symbolic of forgiveness. Actually, non-judgment. The Father never had to forgive because he didn't judge his Son. And it's when we begin to judge others that we cause that sense of separation from God. So then the father says, bring a seamless robe for him. And it does say seamless, and in those days a seamless robe was considered something royalty wore. It was a very pricey garment. And so what Jesus is saying, I'm going to bestow the very best on him because he has come back to an awareness of his oneness with Source. Bring a ring for his finger, royalty. Put sandals on his feet to protect his feet. This is a great one, kill the fatted calf. In those days, that was a delicacy. Okay? And we're going to have a party because we're going to celebrate that my son who was gone, he said dead, which meant he was gone, has come back. He's been revitalized. He's here. Now, there's one other part to the story that we haven't talked about, and that's the stay-at-home son. All this time, the stay-at-home son was out in the field doing his duties. He was pulling the weeds, mowing the lawn, doing all the stuff that you have to do on a farm. And he was being a dutiful son. He never, bothered the father. He never did anything other than to just continue to do. And so the stay-at-home son hears this party going on up in the farmhouse. And he goes up to one of the servants and he says, "What's going on in there? I hear all this ruckus, this noise coming out of there. What's happening?" And the servant says, "Well, didn't you know your brother who was dead, who was gone, has come back to life? He's here. He's back with your father, and your father has thrown a party for him. He's so happy." And so the son, what does the son do? He's not a happy camper. He sees what's going on, and he stomps off. And his father comes to him and says, What's wrong, son? And the son says, "Dad, this just isn't fair. All these years, I've been right here on the farm, working hard, diligently, doing whatever you asked me to do, and never asked for anything. And what do? You give your money to this son who leaves, spends it all on stupid things, and then comes back. And what do? You throw a party for him, and you kill the fatted calf. You never even gave me a goat." It's written there. A kid, actually, which is that's the not good meat. Okay, so the son was saying, "You give him the best of everything. And God, I love this. The father takes his son, and this is my visualization of it. He comes to the edge of the farm, the bluff on the farm, and he puts his arm around his son. And he says, and this is the stay-at-home son, he says, "Son, don't you realize all of this is yours and always has been?" Oh. What's the metaphor of the stay-at-home son? The stay-at-home son was so busy doing that he never took time to appreciate the gifts that were already given to him on the farm. In other words, the stay-at-home son was so full of what's the word I'm looking for? Taking things for granted that he never saw the gifts that the father had bestowed right there. He never had to leave the farm to have all these wonderful gifts, and yet he never paid attention to the fact that they were there. Now, what part of the stay-at-home son is living within your consciousness? You ever take anything for granted? When was the last time you thought about the food you eat in the morning and the blessing it is to your body? What about, I love, Thich Nhat Hanh has a great one. He says, when we think about taking things for granted, give some thought to this. When was the last time you gave thanks for a non-toothache? You're not grateful for no toothaches until you have a toothache, yeah? We're not grateful for a lot of things until we don't have them. And here's the point. With gratitude, you're awakened to the fact that you have them now. That is the story of the meaning of the story. Is the prodigal son believed he had to go off into the far country, that sense of separation, in order for him to have the fullness of life that he wanted. The stay-at-home son had it right there under his feet, but he didn't see it. So the takeaway is clearly if the Father and I are one. Do you believe that? Two of you? If you truly believe that, the next time you head out the door for the far country, thinking that after you acquire this or that you're going to be more at peace, stop and say, wait a minute. What I need is right here in this moment. I just have to have a shift in my awareness of my oneness with my source. Okay? So the prodigal son, this is one of the greatest stories of redemption. To be redeemed, to heal that belief in separation from source, from God. And to realize that you don't have to go anywhere to have that experience. You just have to wake up. Take a deep breath. So when you leave here today, ask yourself, what am I seeking for out there that when I get it, I think I'm going to be happier? And you know darn well that once you get it, happiness will still elude you because that's not really what you're looking for. You're looking for what's behind the acquisition of the thing, or it could be a reputation or a physical condition. What you're looking for is the peace of mind that you think that will bring you. And if you could go directly to the source rather than to the effect, thinking that that's going to give you peace of mind, wouldn't you be much better off as a stay-at-home son and just become aware that you don't have to go anywhere in order to experience the good that life has bestowed upon you? Take a breath. Take a deep breath. See, I've had the prodigal son experience in this last year, off and on, where I've gone unconscious. I cannot argue. But I've also had the stay-at-home son's consciousness, where life has been so amazing right in front of me, but I didn't see it because I was focusing on the issues. I think that's the essence of this story. The prodigal son is alive and well in each of us, and so is the stay-at-home son, and so is the Father that makes all things whole. This is the story of returning to wholeness, coming home, remembering that when you have separated yourself from God, to come home. I will rise and return to the Father. It's that simple. And you're in the right place to do that. You're in a spiritual community that every week you get the message, one, one, one. One God, one mind, one power, in me, as me, through me, expresses itself in divine ways. This is the story of coming home. This is the story of your return to wholeness. And so it is.